The quiet hum of a summer night, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of a sleeping world. Imagine for a moment a different kind of sound, one that carried not the promise of rest, but the illusion of impending conflict. During the Second World War, far from the front lines, a unique unit was quietly working, their weapons not steel and gunpowder, but rubber, canvas, and ingenuity. They were the architects of deception, the weavers of phantom armies, a group whose very existence was a carefully guarded secret, designed to fool an enemy into believing what simply was not there. Their story is one of imagination taking flight, of subtle artifice, and of a profound, often overlooked contribution to the Allied victory. To truly understand the extraordinary achievements of this remarkable unit, we must first examine the desperate circumstances that birthed such an unconventional force and the brilliant minds that conceived of its existence. The story of the Ghost Army, officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, truly begins in the crucible of necessity during World War II. By 1943, the Allied forces were preparing for a monumental undertaking, the liberation of Europe. This endeavour, codenamed Operation Overlord, would require a massive invasion of Normandy, a complex and perilous assault against heavily fortified German defences. The sheer scale of the invasion, the thousands of ships, planes, and men that would be involved, presented an immense logistical and strategic challenge. But perhaps the greatest challenge, beyond the battlefield itself, was the challenge of deception. The German military, while formidable, was not without its vulnerabilities. One of the most significant was their reliance on intelligence, particularly visual and auditory reconnaissance. If the Allies could effectively mislead the enemy about the true locations and strengths of their forces, they could create opportunities, sow confusion, and ultimately save countless lives. It was in this context that the seeds of the Ghost Army were sown. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, understood the vital importance of strategic deception. He recognized that a well-executed deception operation could not only achieve battlefield objectives, but also tie down enemy reserves that could otherwise be deployed to critical sectors. He needed a unit that could create a convincing illusion of military presence, a phantom force that could draw enemy attention away from the real invasion points, or make the enemy believe that attacks were imminent, where in reality, only smoke and mirrors existed. The genesis of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops can be traced back to several existing, albeit smaller, deception units. These units had experimented with various methods of camouflage and misinformation. However, there was a growing realization that a dedicated, highly specialized unit was needed to coordinate and execute deception on a much grander scale. The concept was both audacious and brilliant: to assemble a diverse group of individuals, many of whom had artistic, theatrical, or engineering backgrounds, and train them in the art of military illusion. These were not your typical soldiers. They were artists, designers, engineers, actors, sculptors, and even radio operators, all brought together for a singular, highly classified purpose. The initial planning and recruitment for this new unit were shrouded in secrecy. The men selected were often unaware of the true nature of their future assignments. They were told they would be involved in special operations, in unique forms of camouflage and concealment. The very idea of an army fighting with inflatable tanks, sound effects, and fake radio transmissions was, to say the least, unusual. Yet it was precisely this unconventional thinking that made the unit so potent. The formal establishment of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops occurred in January 1944, just months before the D-Day landings. The unit was comprised of 4 main components, each playing a crucial role in the symphony of deception. There was the Special Effects Company, responsible for the visual elements of their illusions. Then came the Signal Company, tasked with creating false radio traffic and manipulating existing communications. Following that was the 31st Engineer Combat Company, which handled the construction and deployment of physical decoys and elaborate setups. Finally, the detachment to the 343rd Engineer General Service Regiment provided essential support and operational infrastructure. The training for these men was as unique as their mission. They were drilled in the principles of camouflage, not just for hiding their own units, but for creating the appearance of other units. They learned to use their artistic skills to craft realistic-looking dummy tanks, artillery pieces, and even entire encampments. They studied the habits and patterns of the enemy, understanding how German reconnaissance would operate and what kinds of evidence would be most convincing. The emphasis was on meticulous detail, on creating an illusion so convincing that even a seasoned observer would be fooled. One of the most visually striking elements of the Ghost Army's arsenal was their collection of inflatable decoys. These were not mere balloons. They were expertly crafted, full-scale replicas of tanks, artillery, trucks, and even jeeps. Made from durable rubberized canvas, they could be inflated by hand pumps or compressors to resemble the real vehicles. When viewed from a distance, or even in grainy aerial reconnaissance photos, these inflatable dummies were remarkably convincing. The goal was to make the enemy believe that significant armored and mechanized forces were present in areas where there were none. Imagine a vast expanse of open ground, seemingly empty, suddenly populated by dozens of tanks and artillery pieces that, upon closer inspection by German scouts, would reveal themselves to be merely air-filled fabric. The psychological impact of such a sight, especially in the tense atmosphere of wartime, could be immense. The special effects company was at the forefront of this visual deception. Artists and sculptors meticulously studied photographs of Allied equipment, noting every rivet, every weld line, every subtle curve. They then worked to replicate these details in their inflatable creations. The material used was specially designed to mimic the texture and reflectivity of real metal. Even the paint used was chosen for its ability to blend with the terrain and the ambient light conditions. These were not crude approximations. They were sophisticated works of art designed to deceive. Beyond the static decoys, the Ghost Army also employed mobile elements. They had the capability to move these inflatable vehicles and position them in convincing tactical formations. They would set up fake bivouac areas, complete with dummy tents and even carefully arranged discarded equipment, to suggest the presence of large troop concentrations. The principle was simple. If the enemy saw evidence of a military presence, they would react to it, diverting resources and attention. The visual deception was only one half of the equation. The other, equally critical, component was auditory deception. The signal company was responsible for creating a convincing sonic landscape of military activity. They had a vast library of sound effects, meticulously recorded from actual military vehicles, artillery fire, and troop movements. These sounds were played through powerful loudspeakers, strategically placed to mimic the noise of a large operational force. Imagine a seemingly quiet sector of the front. Suddenly, the distant rumble of tank engines begins to grow, accompanied by the clatter of tracks and the sharp crackle of what sounds like small arms fire. These sounds, broadcast at carefully calibrated volumes and distances, were designed to simulate the presence of a substantial fighting force. The engineers and technicians would spend hours calibrating the loudspeakers, ensuring that the sounds appeared to emanate from believable locations and at realistic intensities. They even developed techniques to simulate the movement of these phantom forces by gradually shifting the location from which the sounds were broadcast, making it seem as though tanks were indeed rolling across the landscape. The radio deception was another crucial element. The signal company maintained a network of mobile radio transmitters. These transmitters would broadcast messages that mimicked the communications traffic of a real army. They would send out coded messages, status reports, and even casual conversations, all designed to create the impression of a large, active military unit operating in a particular area. The operators would meticulously study real military radio procedures and terminology, ensuring their fabricated transmissions were indistinguishable from genuine ones. They would even deliberately introduce minor errors or delays, mimicking the chaotic nature of battlefield communications. To further enhance the illusion of authenticity, the goal of this auditory and radio deception was to influence the enemy's intelligence assessments. German reconnaissance units, be they air patrols, ground scouts, or radio intercept operators, would be fed a constant stream of convincing evidence that a large Allied force was operating in a specific location. This would lead them to report troop concentrations and movements that simply did not exist, prompting the German command to divert their own forces or alter their defensive plans based on this misinformation. The 31st Engineer Combat Company played a vital role in the physical deployment of these deceptions. They were responsible for transporting, setting up, and maintaining the inflatable decoys and sound equipment. Their work required immense logistical coordination and a keen understanding of terrain. They had to ensure that the decoys were placed in positions that would be observed by the enemy, and that the sound systems were effective without giving away their presence. They would often work under the cover of darkness, moving large numbers of inflatable tanks and artillery pieces into position with surprising speed and stealth. The detachment of the 343rd Engineer General Service Regiment provided the essential backbone for the entire operation. They were responsible for the construction of the inflatable decoys themselves, for maintaining the vehicles that transported the equipment, and for providing general engineering support to the unit. This involved everything from setting up makeshift workshops to building roads and bridges that would allow for the rapid deployment of their phantom forces. The operational deployment of the Ghost Army was meticulously planned and executed. They were often attached to larger army groups or corps, operating in close coordination with regular combat units. Their missions were varied, but always centered on creating a diversion or drawing enemy attention away from critical objectives. One of their earliest significant operations took place in England in the spring of 1944. In anticipation of the D-Day landings, the Allied command wanted to convince the Germans that a major invasion force was assembling in the Pas-de-Calais region, the closest point in France to England. The Ghost Army was instrumental in creating this illusion. They deployed hundreds of inflatable tanks, artillery pieces, and trucks in the Pas-de-Calais area, making it appear as though a massive invasion force was poised to cross the English Channel. They also broadcast extensive radio traffic, simulating the movements and preparations of such an invasion. This deception was highly effective, contributing to the German command's belief that the main Allied landing would occur in the Pas-de-Calais, rather than in Normandy, where the actual invasion took place. This misdirection played a crucial role in the success of D-Day, as it meant fewer German reserves were positioned to counter the Normandy landings. Following the D-Day landings and the subsequent Allied advance into France, the Ghost Army continued its vital work. As the Allied armies pushed eastward, the need for deception remained paramount. They were deployed to create diversions, to make enemy forces believe that attacks were imminent in areas where only a small reconnaissance force was present, or to conceal the true axis of an advance. During the advance across France, there were numerous instances where the Ghost Army would create the illusion of a much larger force than was actually present. They would inflate their dummy tanks and artillery pieces, position them strategically, and then broadcast radio traffic simulating a full-scale armored division on the move. This would often cause German commanders to commit precious reserves to defending areas that were, in reality, lightly defended or completely empty. One particularly notable operation occurred during the Allied crossing of the Rhine River in March 1945. The Allied command planned a major crossing operation, Operation Plunder. To support this operation, the Ghost Army was tasked with creating a diversionary attack further downstream. They deployed a substantial number of inflatable tanks and artillery pieces, along with dummy bridges and encampments, to suggest a large-scale crossing was about to occur in that sector. They also generated a massive amount of radio traffic, simulating a major armored thrust. This deception was so convincing that the Germans diverted significant forces to counter the feigned threat, weakening their defenses at the actual crossing point. The visual and auditory illusions employed by the Ghost Army were not limited to static displays. They also developed techniques for simulating troop movements. They had specially designed trucks that could carry inflatable vehicles and position them in different locations throughout the night, creating the illusion of a constantly shifting and advancing army. They would use sound trucks, equipped with powerful loudspeakers, to mimic the rumble of tanks and the clatter of vehicles, making it seem as though a column of armor was moving across the landscape. The success of the Ghost Army was not measured in captured territory or enemy casualties inflicted directly, but in the strategic advantages they gained for the Allied forces. Their operations allowed for more efficient use of Allied resources. As enemy forces were constantly reacting to phantom threats, they saved lives by diverting enemy attention and by preventing costly frontal assaults. Their work was a testament to the power of information warfare and psychological manipulation. The men of the Ghost Army were highly skilled and dedicated. Many of them had pursued careers in the art and creative industries before the war. They brought their unique talents to bear on the battlefield, transforming their artistic sensibilities into instruments of warfare. Their ability to understand the enemy's perception and to manipulate it through artifice was a rare and valuable skill. Consider the meticulous detail that went into their work. An inflatable tank, for instance, was not just a hollow shell. It was painted to match the exact camouflage patterns used by Allied forces, and its surfaces were often treated to reflect light in a way that mimicked actual metal. Even the placement of these decoys was carefully considered. They would be positioned on hilltops, in open fields, or along roadsides where they were most likely to be observed by enemy reconnaissance planes or ground patrols. The sound effects were equally sophisticated. The unit had a vast library of audio recordings, ranging from the distinctive rumble of a Sherman tank to the sharp crack of anti-tank artillery. These sounds were broadcast through a network of loudspeakers, carefully positioned to create a sense of depth and distance. They would even simulate the movement of vehicles by gradually shifting the location from which the sounds were broadcast, making it seem as though a large convoy was slowly making its way across the countryside. Radio deception was another critical component. The Ghost Army operated a network of mobile radio transmitters, broadcasting fabricated radio traffic that mimicked the communications of a real army. They would send out coded messages, status reports, and even casual conversations, all designed to create the impression of a large, active military unit operating in a particular area. The operators were trained to speak in the jargon and slang of the time, making their transmissions sound entirely authentic. The impact of their deception was profound. German intelligence, constantly bombarded with false information, was often led to believe that Allied forces were much larger and more widely deployed than they actually were. This led to misallocation of German troops and resources, and it played a significant role in enabling successful Allied operations, including the Normandy landings and the crossing of the Rhine. The secrecy surrounding the Ghost Army was absolute. Their existence was not revealed to the public until decades after the war. The men who served in the unit understood the importance of this secrecy, knowing that their effectiveness depended on the enemy's ignorance of their true nature. They were the unseen warriors, the silent architects of illusion, whose contributions were vital to the Allied victory. The transition from artistic endeavor to military strategy was a fascinating one. Men who had once painted landscapes or designed stage sets were now using their skills to create the illusion of armored divisions or artillery bombardments. They understood that the mind could be as much a battlefield as the physical terrain, and they were masters of shaping enemy perceptions. The sheer scale of the deception operations undertaken by the Ghost Army is remarkable. They were capable of creating the illusion of entire divisions, complete with tanks, artillery, and supporting infantry, in areas where there were only a handful of men and a few inflatable dummies. This required an immense amount of planning, coordination, and logistical support. The psychological impact of their operations cannot be overstated. The constant threat of a phantom enemy could have a debilitating effect on enemy morale. German commanders would often find themselves having to defend against threats that did not truly exist, diverting valuable resources and attention away from where they were truly needed. The unit's operations were not confined to one particular theatre of war. While they were most active in the European theatre, their methods and principles were applicable wherever deception could offer a strategic advantage. The story of the Ghost Army is a reminder that warfare is not always about brute force. It is also about intelligence, about ingenuity, and about the subtle art of deception. These were men who fought with their minds and their creativity, using the tools of art and engineering to achieve their objectives. The success of their missions depended on the meticulous attention to detail. Every element of their illusions was carefully crafted to be as convincing as possible, from the smallest rivet on an inflatable tank to the subtle nuances of radio traffic. Nothing was left to chance. The skills developed by the Ghost Army were unique. They were trained in fields that were far removed from traditional military pursuits. Yet, these very skills proved to be invaluable in the context of modern warfare. The legacy of the Ghost Army is one of quiet but profound impact. Their story highlights the importance of strategic deception in warfare and the often unsung contributions of specialized units. They were the masters of illusion, the phantom warriors, who helped to turn the tide of the war without firing a single shot in anger. Their art was their weapon, and their canvas was the battlefield itself. The operational tempo for the Ghost Army was often intense, especially during major offensives. They would be deployed to create diversions that allowed the main Allied forces to advance with less opposition. They would often operate behind enemy lines, placing their decoys and sound systems in locations where they would be most effective. The coordination with regular combat units was crucial. The Ghost Army would receive intelligence about enemy positions and dispositions, and then plan their deceptions accordingly. They would work closely with artillery units, for instance, to simulate bombardments in areas where no actual shelling was occurring. The development of their technology was ongoing. As the war progressed, they continued to refine their techniques and improve their equipment. The inflatable decoys became more realistic, the sound systems more sophisticated, and the radio deception more elaborate. The men of the Ghost Army were not just soldiers. They were artists, engineers, and illusionists. They brought a unique set of skills and a creative mindset to their work, which was essential for their success. Their ability to think outside the box and to challenge conventional notions of warfare was what made them so effective. The psychological warfare aspect of their operations was also significant. The constant uncertainty and misdirection created by the Ghost Army could have a demoralizing effect on the enemy. They were forced to react to threats that did not exist, wasting valuable time and resources. The post-war years saw the gradual unveiling of the Ghost Army's story. As classified documents were declassified, the public began to learn about this remarkable unit and its extraordinary contributions to the war effort. Their story serves as a testament to the power of ingenuity and the multifaceted nature of warfare. The unit's impact extended beyond the battlefield. The techniques and principles of deception developed by the Ghost Army have influenced military strategy and intelligence operations to this day. Their work demonstrated the effectiveness of information warfare as a critical component of modern military operations. The quiet hum of their operations, the unseen artistry of their deceptions, and the strategic advantage they provided are all part of a fascinating chapter in military history. They were the masters of the Phantom War, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one that creates the illusion of force. Their legacy is one of creativity, courage, and a profound understanding of the battlefield of the mind. The story of the Ghost Army is a reminder that history, in its intricate detail, offers endless avenues of fascinating and ultimately deeply calming exploration, a testament to human ingenuity in the most unexpected of circumstances.